If you can please mute your microphones, that way we don't have any unnecessary noise. When we open the floor up for questions, of course, then you can unmute yourself and feel free to ask your questions and/or type any of your comments in the comment box. Okay, so I'm just going to give a little bit of a brief introduction before I introduce Shifra and Yaakov. My name is Ayala Leibowitz, and I am the Director of Operations for Project Extreme. Since the year 2000, Project Extreme has been hosting a variety of programs for troubled teens. Currently, we're running 2 separate summer programs, and while our back-to-back programs usually take place in the Canadian Rockies, this year, due to COVID, we're hosting them at our Minnesota Girls Academy campus. During the year, we host Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos, which are obviously very high anxiety times, both for teens and their families. We run Shabbatons, a crisis text line, and host Miriam's House, which is a transitional living shelter for young women in Brooklyn. That and a lot more. Over the past 20 years, we've learned a lot about helping teens successfully survive crisis and mature into healthy, happy, and productive adults. With no clear end in sight to the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that many teens and their families are struggling. And we hope that this webinar can help teach you important tools when dealing with your teens. If anybody has any comments, if you can please message the moderator, Joey Weisberg, and if you could send it to him privately, that would be most ideal. Tonight we have a panel with Shifra and Yaakov Rabinowitz. It's very exciting to introduce you to them. Shifra is a licensed mental health counselor and has been the program director at Miriam's House for the past 4 years. She expertly runs our home with a feeling of love, security, and structure. And it's also great to have Yaakov with us, who has been directing our Camp Extreme Boys program, the clinical end of it, for the past 2 years. And he also puts in a lot of extra time at Miriam's House. So for that, we're also very appreciative. Before we begin, I'd just like to give a special thank you to Rachel Duretsky and Joey Weisberg, who were joining Project Extreme this summer as marketing interns via Yeshiva University's SAIS School of Business internship program. They have been really a pleasure to work with. They've given me wonderful insights and have really added a lot to our resources and what we can bring to you guys. So thank you so much to them for really making all of this happen. We're going to start in just a minute. Again, as I said, if you have any comments or questions, please put it in the comments box. You can also, digitally raise your hands, and we'll try to reach out to you. And we hope that this webinar can be as helpful as possible. Shifra.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Just as a way of introduction, our goal, tonight is to give, a general overview, some suggestions and ideas for how to cope a little bit better and deal with these universally difficult times, with the understanding that everybody's got a different story. Everyone's got different details, that different problems and challenges that they're facing through these times. And, we're here to try to offer new resources and new tools, how to handle them, hopefully a little bit better, I guess, for lack of a better word. So, Shifra, I think you want to take over and talk about what is essential.
Sure. So the theme that we chose for this webinar is essential. I think that one of the words, the word essential and the word unprecedented are words that I've heard so many times in just these last few months. And I think that's where we want to focus, really trying to understand what is essential in our lives and our new reality, what is essential in our kids' lives, and how we can frame our relationships, how we can frame what it is that we're doing with that idea. So essential means the things, the people, the places, the ideas that we cannot live without. In the last 4 months, I think it's 4 months now, right? The whole world has turned upside down, and the people that we may have put on considered on a lower caste or a lower social group have now really become the most important people in our lives. Some of the places that we might not have considered essential have really become some of the most important in our lives. So when we're thinking about what is essential, we want to frame this conversation in terms of what do our kids need? What is most essential for us and what is most essential for our kids? We all know at this point that Uber Eats is essential. We know that liquor stores are essential. We know that schools are not essential. We know that homework is not essential. We know that shuls maybe are not as essential as we once thought they were. So let's think about, as we know, we're going through this, let's try to use that frame. And to jump right off of that, in thinking about it, deciding for our families what is essential and what is not essential, it's going to stem from our values. Our values are our deeply held intellectual beliefs about what is important in life. There's a lot of actions that we take throughout our days, throughout our weeks, and on those actions are connected to a value. We might have thinking a person might have a value of being at shul on time or being the first one in shul. That's an action. The question is, what is the value underneath that action? The action might be chashivas haTorah, it might be punctuality, it might be anxiety, right? It might be any idea that it goes under the action is really what we're going to think about as our values. So I'm going to invite you tonight to think about what your values are. Each family, each person has their own constellation of values that really frames how we make decisions, how we think about our kids and what they need. When we lead with values, we are leading from a place of calm, we are leading from a place of good decision making, and we're leading from a place of personal integrity. And values are not something that we can agree or disagree on for anyone else. It's those core ideas, those core beliefs that really help us make choices. The opposite of leading with values is leading with emotion. Yaakov and I are both therapists. We spend our days thinking about, talking about, learning about emotions, and we hold them in very high regard. But in this specific context, when we're thinking about parenting, when we're thinking about what our kids need, when we're thinking about the crisis that we've been living in for this long time, when we're leading with emotions, it's often a result of poor decision. It often leads to poor decision making or to hasty decisions that can end up coming back to bite us. So for the purposes of this conversation, the opposite of values-led parenting is emotion-led parenting. You have let's see, you might get a call that your child was kicked out of yeshiva in Israel and they've been put on a plane home. There's any number of actions that you could take. When you're the one picking them up at the airport, what do? You're gonna give them the silent treatment. You're gonna give them a hug. What's that first conversation was gonna be? You're gonna lead with your emotions, how you might be feeling about something. You're gonna lead with your values, which are the core, way of how do I lead my family, which are values are stable throughout our lives for the most part. They can change, they can add, we can subtract, but for the most part, our values are really who we are and at the core of everything that we stand for. So that's my invitation tonight, is to think about what our values are, what your family's value are, what the way that the highest ideal that your family espouses, and to use that as a frame, because what we're talking about tonight is a lot of complex situations. We're going to be talking about, every family has its own challenges, its own needs, and there's no way that that you're going to hear from us the solution to all the challenges that your children have been facing, that you have been facing as a family. What we're going to hear instead is an invitation to go through this process and through the rest of this crisis with that idea of, well, how am I leading? What is the deep set ideals with which I'm leading, my family?
So thank you for that, Jifra. And so the specific topic that we're talking about tonight is not just how to live and thrive in this difficult time, not just how to be a parent in this difficult time, but how to parent teenagers. And so I think an important thing to understand is a little bit about what a teenager is. And, it's kind of confusing because on the one hand, they're no longer children. On the other hand, they clearly are not fully grown, responsible adults. And it's that transitional period that really, defines adolescence and being a teenager, where they're starting to, kind of grow in their abilities and capabilities and responsibilities. But at the same time, their brains have, and they're especially, the part of their brain which is responsible for, long-term decision-making and self-discipline, and that kind of helps us to prepare for the future and be responsible, and make, sometimes these difficult decisions between what feels good now and what is easy now and what is best for us in the long term is often really difficult for them. And, so, and that is, I think, just another overlying framework, which I think is going to be really important to understand. Now, how do we best support our teenagers who are in this transitional period through these really difficult and unprecedented times? So, the first thing, we talked about is when we're trying to understand, what is essential, and when, all of our schools and all of our shows and all of our activities and all of our outlets and all of our structure has been taken away, we have to learn to be flexible. And that is the first overarching, I guess, rule, is that the more we try to hang on to control in a situation where we can't, the more stress that we take on ourselves, and the more anxiety that comes out, and that leads to flaring conflict and anger and problems between each other, as we're trying to force our kids to do things that are maybe good for them, or maybe we want them to do, but is not working, and only oftentimes makes the situations worse. And so it's at this time that we need to learn to be flexible, and to fall back not on what is ideal, and rather to try to understand what is essential, and how do we try to provide that for our kids so that they don't slide further back into you know struggling, their struggles and challenges at this time. And one very important thing, when kind of trying to navigate the situation, is making sure that you have a team, that you have people that you can turn to ask for help, for advice, for guidance, how to make this balance between being flexible and being firm, how to let go of what's essential, of not essential, but still be able to hold on to those things which actually are essential and are important to hang on to. And the first thing that we would always recommend is having a competent and experienced Rav who you can ask, who has familiarity with these real life challenges, and especially if you have dealing with a troubled teenager, someone who has experience with people who are struggling with these types of issues, and don't have your regular run of the mill, can I put the cholent back on the blech on Shabbos, and what's considered dry, and really has a more nuanced understanding also, not of these real life shilas that come up when we're really put to difficult, challenging times, and to be able to turn to somebody like that who can guide us and help us understand what is essential, what is mutter, what is aser, what is l'chachila, and what is non-negotiable. And that having someone like that on our team is going to be essential at navigating through these really difficult times. The next thing that every developing person needs is structure. And that's one of the things that teenagers don't like, but they need. And especially at this time when there's a lot of built-in structure, which makes it easier. There's school with a schedule and homework and requirements, and there's extracurriculars, and there's summer camp, and there's maybe there's shul, and maybe there's activities and groups, and whatever it is, that there's a tour to the day. There's structure, and the problem is that all of that has been pulled away. And I've spoken to so many kids and so many parents who are staying up till 4 a.m. and sleeping to 3 p.m, and they're getting up and they're having dinner at 11 o'clock at night, and and their life is turned upside down because they've lost that structure. And while sometimes they may complain, and sometimes they may give us issues, making sure they have some sort of structure in their day and in their life is an incredibly foundational and important thing. Now, it becomes very tricky when we try to implement that, because structure is not the same thing as taking away options. It's taking away the non-essential options and leaving essential expectations. And so that's, I think, the first thing to realize, and that's also where it becomes very important that we work through and try to understand what is essential and what is not essential, because it's very easy to say, okay, we need structure, so you're gonna be getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're gonna be davening and doing this, and you're coming to meet with me there. But that having a structure is not the same thing as micromanaging, our children's lives. And especially as teenagers, well, we can tell our 3-year-old or our 6-year-old when to wake up and when to go to sleep and when to nap and what they're going to eat for dinner, sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't work quite as well as we planned. We can't micromanage our teenagers' lives quite in the same way. And we need to balance between giving them freedom to choose and providing non-negotiable structure. So,
a structure could be one thing. It could be one thing that you accomplish today, whatever it is, no matter how small. Structure doesn't have to be, a schedule. Right? It's some sort of accountability where there's a thing that they know.
Expectations.
Yeah.
So expectations on, I guess, how they're going to spend and use their day. And that doesn't mean, and obviously I think that the point we're trying to get across is while leaving them the choice and the options to be able to fit that with, their own preferences and their own identity and their own values, and their own specific life experiences. So,
which they can be, sorry to interrupt, which they can be included in. There are many families that have family meetings where they're beginning of the week, end of the week, sit down. Everyone is able to pick a chore. Everyone picks something that they want to accomplish during the week. Everyone shares what it is that they're doing, what they're not doing. To include, to empower your kids to be a part of that conversation is something that is also incredibly valuable.
Right. I think just one example that maybe might help illustrate the point more is, it's essential that your children eat. So an expectation, you're going to eat today, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, I don't know, right? And but what you eat, now that becomes a little bit negotiable. That's where you get some choice. I think, you probably cannot only have ice cream, potato chips, but maybe you can include them. And so that's where, you start seeing that there are some things which are essential. There's some structures which, are non-negotiable. Your child is going to eat today, has to eat today. And the question of when exactly they're going to eat, what exactly they're going to eat, what is allowed, what is required, becomes negotiable, becomes what you can discuss and give them the ability to talk about and to negotiate with and to have autonomy and choice in deciding. The next thing that that I think can be a very helpful and important approach to helping our teenagers through this time is that, like we said, the essential challenge of a teenager is being able to defer gratification, to be able to give up short-term, pleasures and desires for a long-term, well-being. And, one way of doing that is kind of balancing the scales, which is through incentivizing good behavior and keeping up with their expectations today. So, you tell a 30-year-old, if you put away, $100 a week for the next 40 years, you're going to have $1 million when you retire, whatever the case is. That's motivating. You tell a 13-year-old, if you put away $100 a week, for the next, 50 years, you'll be a millionaire. He'll say, well, but if I give up $100 a week, I can't buy candy and soda and slushies. And so I think I'd rather do that. Right. Or, incentivizing our kids to make these good choices and to keep their best interests, long-term interest in mind is a real powerful way of, having them motivated today to do those things which are good for them to, not just today, but also tomorrow and a week and a month from now. And, listen, that can come in a whole host of different, avenues. For some people, maybe it means literally bribing them, giving your kid money, telling you that I'm going to give you $100 a week or $100 a month, or whatever the number is that kind of works for you and your kid to, do these things, to spend 15 minutes a day, with a safer, to spend 15 minutes a day, working on your summer school work, to spend, 30 minutes a day exercising, or, to spend, or whatever the case is, or if you get up and daven by this time, you get these things. And it's, whether it's actually giving them money, whether it's, incentivizing them with some sort of, trip, whether it's, finding something else that is valuable to your kid that'll motivate him or her to do those things that are good for them, but aren't so easy to do. is a very powerful way of helping them to engage and to be motivated to do those things that will help them feel good, feel fulfilled, and not just be okay, but potentially even thrive through these difficult times.
I want to comment on one of the comments that just came in about the structure in your house is separate 7. If your family doesn't want or need anything beyond that, then congratulations, you found what works for you. If there are other things that you want to include in the structure, other things you want to build in, okay, so we can talk about how to do that. But separate 7, that's the structure. Then this is just going to go back to what are your family's values? What is it that you need? What is it that your kids need?
So I guess the next question that we got is, how do you add structure if you don't already have it? And that is a fantastic and difficult question. And I think the simple answer is it's not always easy. But I think the next thing, it involves communication and explaining that these are the expectations. And sometimes that's going to come along in this. And I specifically don't think that, knocking on your kid's door, that our new expectation is that you have, that dinner's at 7 and this at 6:59. So come on downstairs right now. That's, kind of leads towards, hey, listen, different people have different kids, and maybe that definitely works for some people, but for people who have, more oppositional or defiant, kids, which I think is often the case, especially if they're not doing so well, you're going to get no in an argument and a fight. And so it comes to having conversations, not in the moment, planning ahead and praying and say, okay, that we're coming up with some new expectations for how things are going to go. And that means, dinner's going to be at 7 o'clock. Or maybe it's going to be negotiable. If you're telling me that doesn't work for you, well, when does work for you? And we're going to try to work through that. And you want to give, again, it's going to have to be this give and take where you're going to tell them there are expectations. And if your kid has a complaint, if your kid has a comment, says, well, but I want it this way. Or, if you say, I want it this way, so then that's something you can communicate. Is that something that's workable? Is that something that you can meet them in the middle? Or is it something that no, and then you'll have to continue that conversation depending on the details and the particulars. And the next thing that is, I think, very helpful and important that you want to fold into there is, what are the consequences and you don't? And what are the potential benefits or incentives if you do? Because the bottom line is, if just having an expectation works, which very often it does, and especially for younger kids, and there are a number of people, if you tell them what to do, they'll do it, and you know what, they'll be happier for it. But there are a lot of kids that doesn't work for, and especially as they get older and and are becoming teenagers, where using those the carrot and the stick, the consequences and the incentives of doing what's expected of them can really make a big difference about working to integrate and create some of the structure in their lives. Do you want to move on to the next thing, or do you want to go through the questions?
Yeah, there are questions that are coming in. There are some really good questions, and some with similar themes, so we're going to address those closer to the end.
Okay. So,
and if your question just doesn't get answered, if we run this down, whatever it is, we'll provide contact information. Joey, I hope that you can help us with this contact information at the end for any conversations that need follow-up.
Okay. So, the next thing that's really important in helping support our children is modeling. I've seen so many different, posts and memes talking about this idea, where that the way that we act and the way that we, I guess, present our children, the way and the choices that we make in our lives, are not lost on our kids. And, we often feel like we can hide things and that we can, and that, that surreptitiously do the things that we don't want our kids to see. But the truth is that, whether it's today or a month or later down the line, our kids are incredibly perceptive, and for the most part. And, you can try to hide things from them, but, you might pay for it and then, on the back end. And so, I can't stress enough the importance of modeling the behavior that you want from your kids. Now, if that means getting up and kind of having a structure to your day, well, maybe that means you doing the same thing. If that means, kind of taking the discipline to set goals for yourself, or to speak to somebody, if you're having a difficult time, or if it means, kind of exercising or taking time, to go for a walk. The things that, don't ask things of your kids that you're not willing to ask of yourself. And if you're saying that you need structure, well, first you have to ask, do I have structure? And, so that modeling.
And many parents do. Many parents are still working to whatever capacity they are. So it's more about the concept than it is. I don't expect that anyone listening to this is staying in bed all day. Although if you are, call that cover. We don't have any expectation that people are just sitting around, expecting their kids to do things that they're not seeing. Just, I think the reminder that our kids are gonna do what we do, not what we say.
And it's really hard for a lot of us, because bottom line is, a lot of us have different work schedules. If we were working before, if we're not working now, or, and a lot of us, had lots of things that we did. Maybe we went to the gym. Maybe we went out and met with friends. Maybe we, had any number of different outlets, which we can't really do. And so, it's not easy for us, but that modeling that behavior that we want, to see in our kids, and we want our kids to emulate, is going to be a really, important and foundational, I guess, thing for helping them see what is good behavior and what is good for us, and how do we deal with this really difficult time. And one last thing that I would say on that is that sometimes it's not just what you do, it's also how you do it. And, that if we're constantly, scrolling through the news and looking at all the problems and stressing out and worrying about every single thing that can go wrong, and we're, kind of winding ourselves up into a ball of stress without, ways to release that and cope with that, it's hard to imagine that our kids aren't going to do something similar. And we feed our, kind of are letting off that anxiety and that stress that we are feeling. It's hard to imagine how that can't negatively impact our children as well. And dovetailing onto that, becomes so foundationally important that we take care of ourselves. And that's going to look different for every single person. I think the first thing that I always jump to when it comes to taking care of yourself is having some sort of physical exercise. And if there was one reason to do it, it would probably be enough, but there's half a dozen reasons why this is good for us. Well, it's not just our physical health, it's our mental health. It's helping us relieve stress. It's having time for ourselves to unwind and to, on a physical, chemical, and emotional level, to help us let go and process all of these different, all of the problems and the stresses that build up inside of us. And besides for that it helps our body to be able to work and function and process better. We sleep better. We, which is another just foundational, an important thing for us to do and to take care of ourselves, during this time, and especially when we're not getting outside as much as we used to. We're not doing all the things that we used to. We're not, leaving and going all these different places where we used to be. So having that time making that time rather to find some exercise, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's going for a run, whether it's just stretching for 5 or 10 minutes, whether it's, taking, an online class, whether it's lifting weights, or, it's figuring out what works for you, what works for your children, and doing something. And while it's much easier for us than to discipline ourselves, that's when we come back to it. So incentivizing our kids to make those good choices. We want to take care of ourselves, and we want our kids to take care of themselves. And part of that's going to be, again, creating those incentives or those expectations that this is going to happen. This is what we're going to do. Are we going to walk for a walk as a family? Am I going to pay you to go for a jog? Am I going to, I would say put up a star chart, but I think that's what I do for the 3-year-old. But, or is it going to be, some other way of incentivizing them to make these good choices to help them take care of themselves? And that having that, and along with whatever else we need to take care of ourselves, making sure that we're getting enough sleep, making sure that, we're taking care of our medical needs, with talking to people, asking for help, having social connection, even if we can't see them in person.
And good enough, I think. The standard is good enough. Normally, we hold ourselves to very high expectations, and we're looking for excellence, and we're pushing our kids, and we're pushing ourselves to higher, better, more. I don't know that that's the same standard that we're looking at now. I think our standard for here is good enough. What's our baseline?
What's essential?
What's essential, exactly.
So I think with that is, I believe, our general overview of, what are things that are important and helpful for everybody. And now I think we want to transition and to talk about some of the particular and specific issues that a lot of kids or a lot of families struggle and deal with, but not everyone does, and kind of some ideas about how to approach, how to deal, how to respond to some of those more, different issues that come up on a case-by-case basis. So, Chipper, do you want to take over with?
So when we talk about it, Yaakov mentioned that you need to have a team. You need to have a group of people who you trust, that you rely on. And it doesn't have to be a big group of people. One person is a team. And you want to kind of just flip that expectation to everybody that we are part of our kids' team. Regardless of relationship, we are the people, or some of the people that our kids expect to be there, to be the parent. We've had a lot of hard conversations, and there's a lot of very challenging conversations that are going on. I spoke to a father recently who's dealing with his teenage son, whose son's in a very, very depressed state, and he knows that his son is using his phone on Shabbos. He knows that his son is using Wi-Fi on Shabbos. So he had a question: do I turn off the Wi-Fi on Shabbos? If I turn off the Wi-Fi, I'm putting him in a situation where a lot worse things than Michal Shabbos could happen. I'm putting him in a situation where a very depressed young man is sitting alone with his thoughts, and that could have some very tragic outcomes. On the other hand, if I keep on the Wi-Fi, I'm enabling Michal Shabbos. And there's two values that are coming in conflict. One, I have my value of keeping my family safe and doing what's best for my son. The other value is his Torah observance, his keeping Shabbos. So when we have a situation where there's two values that are coming in conflict, this is really where having a team, having other people to hear what is happening in our lives is really valuable. Whether it's a partner, whether it is a therapist for yourself, whether it is a rabbi, whether it is a mentor, other people that are not emotionally involved in a situation who can help you figure out which of these values needs to come first. I think one of the interesting things about this time, in particular when we talk about halacha and what's coming up, the psak, what is it, plural psak? The psakim. See, there's a Rosh Kol on this call. Maybe you can help me, right? But there's that which is coming out is maybe different than what we would have expected from 6 months ago, a year. We're talking Pesach, when there was so much conversation about a Zoom Seder. Who on earth would have thought that there would be people walking around talking about how it's completely appropriate to have a Zoom Seder? Okay, good. We found out later that it was misquoted. It wasn't really, but that which we're hearing, and certainly when it comes to halacha, is not the same as it is the rest of our lives. So I think that one of the things that comes into play is validation, and really, really, really being able to validate both our own experiences as well as the experiences of our children. So I think validation gets a bad rap because people confuse it with agreeing with everything the other person says. I want to give just an illustration of this. I have a client, or I worked with a client in the past who was in her 20s, and she was plagued her entire life by very, very serious anxiety. Agoraphobia, OCD, every version of anxiety that could be, she had it. And she shared with me once that she considered herself on par with a Holocaust survivor. That everything, she's been through so much, just so consistently, she feels as if she thinks that she believes that she understands what Holocaust survivors have been through. And when I hear something like this, my heart just, what does that mean? You're not a Holocaust survivor. You're not playing in the same arena, playing in the same sandbox. But when I was able to mute the judgmental voices in my head, I'm able to really understand what it is she's trying to say. What she's trying to say is, I feel like this is the worst case scenario that could have happened in my life. And when I'm able to see that through her lens, I understand what she means, and I understand why she feels that way. I don't agree with her analysis, I do not agree with her analysis, but I understand what she means. And I'm able to reflect to her, I understand where you're coming from. I see how you got to that conclusion. And the other person feels understood, and they feel heard. So this is, consider this permission to validate your own experience. Whatever it is that you're experiencing, there's no right, there's no normal. Our baseline for what is normal has completely shifted. So we'll start off with, and as parents, as people who are trying to lead teenagers through this unprecedented, right, through this very difficult time, which we're all living in. That's where I want to start, by recognizing whatever it is that is happening to you, that's okay. And whatever it is that's happening to your kids, we see you. Parents, we see you. We've had some, very, very difficult conversations, and we know that for as many as we've had, there are so many more that need to be had that just have not yet been had. I want to encourage everyone to think about who their team is, think about who are the people that they rely on, who they can rely on. If Project Extreme is not already a part of your team, we can be. That's what we do. We help people find, connection and guidance, figure out what it is that they need to do for their families. So that's one. So the first idea. It also goes to people with either children who are either already have a messy relationship with their children, or their kids are at risk, or no longer religious, or any other of the heartbreaking and challenging situations that are coming up and people find themselves in. That's really it. Think about what it is that you need, and be able to start from there. We cannot pour from an empty cup. One of the self-care is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what self-care is. It's not bubble baths and manicures, although it can be. Self-care is about doing the things that you need to do so that you can take care of yourself. Having a difficult conversation with someone might be self-care. Going to therapy might be self-care. Making your bed in the morning might be self-care. It's not just about the surface level things that we do to take care of ourselves. It's also about the deeper things, the harder things that we need to do in order to function, in order to be the best version of ourselves. So that's one. That's one topic, and that is a whole. We could speak many more hours on helping parents guide their families through these types of difficult situations and these types of challenging relationships. But I want to just briefly give attention to one of the particularly unusual and challenging situations are parents of children with special needs, teenagers with special needs. I think that one of the things that I've seen is that we've really, in many ways, failed. Those systems have really failed to support those family and those teenagers and those children when the word essential is being thrown around, or when everything shuts down. So I just suggest to the parents whose children have learning differences and are struggling in school in a different way than everyone else, the people who need their essential services or the outside supports, whether it's day programs or camps or therapies. I wish that this is beyond my scope of expertise, but I just want to mention that we see you, we hear it, and we have to figure out a way to do better for these parents and these children. So that's another thing. So I think the last topic I want to address is parents of teenagers who have mental health issues. So I just want to briefly go over some of the red flags, some of the things to look for when we're talking about the coronavirus, being home a lot, structure, no structure. Some of the things to be on the lookout for are, some of the red flags are significant changes in mood or behavior. And that could look anything. It's often, when we think about it, it's differences in changes in mood and behavior are one thing and its opposite. Way too much sleeping, way little sleeping, too much eating, too little eating. So it's the things that are in extremes are really where we're going to find, just to think about what might be some red flags. You have a suspicion that your child is using drugs or alcohol to cope. Your child looks inebriated, you find drug paraphernalia. You begin to suspect maybe self-harm. You begin to notice them seeming to be in an ongoing funk, and a different funk than just the regular bad mood, perpetual bad mood that some teenagers find themselves in. Anything that makes you wonder, what is this? You don't have to wait until you hear something tragic. You don't have to wait until you hear something very serious in order to reach out for help. Something that makes you question is something that you should reach out for help. Or there's a bunch of different, there's a few different hotlines Amujim has one, Crisis Text Line has one. There are a few others, now I'm blanking on the names, different hotlines, places that you can reach out to find out, do you have, what am I seeing? Is this normal? Is this something I need help for? Don't be afraid to get help. I would say that, my caseload has really, I think all the therapists I know, our caseloads have all grown during this time because there is just so much more happening. There's so many more thoughts, feelings, questions, concerns in the air, and there is no shame in reaching out, and it is only an honorable thing. Even if the answer is, that sounds like a normal thing that your child's experiencing, that's fine, then you'll have that answer. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is the idea of hope. One of the things that I find ironic about even giving a webinar like this is that, I will confess to you, I've actually found it very hard to join webinars and to join informational sessions about how do you handle this, how do you handle this. One of the reasons is because if I want to go to an expert on anxiety, I know who to call. I'm going to go to an expert in anxiety. I'm going to go to someone who has 20, 30 years working with anxiety in different populations. There's no expert in coronavirus. There's no expert in what do you do when your whole world, the whole globe shuts down at the same time. There's no experts in this. So what I want to leave off with or think about is that idea of hope, which is that we don't know what's coming. We don't know what the next iteration of the time that we're living in is. None of us do. And as frightening and as anxiety provoking as that can be, I find that to be a very, almost a hopeful thing also, because people are resilient. Children are resilient. Teenagers, with all of the nonsense that they sometimes present with, definitely not a clinically appropriate thing to refer to our children's behavior as nonsense, but with all the challenges that come up, people are resilient, and we're gonna get through this one way or the other. And the way that really the world has responded is that we're getting through it together. So the idea of togetherness is that idea of we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. This is not, our world is not over. The world is not, as much as it seems like our world has ended, it's not over. And we're going to continue living through this. And if you're a person of faith and you have an idea that there is a plan and there is a reason and there is a why for all this, it makes it a lot easier to hold on to that. It makes it a lot easier to make it through every day at a time. So when I want to close this portion by reminding you that we see you, we hear you. The questions that we've been dealing with, the situations, the families, they're really big and they're really important, and we welcome them. We welcome these conversations. If not now, when? So please, feel free to reach out to allow Project Stream, if that's appropriate for you, to be a part of your team and to help. Here's to figuring out what our values are. Here's to figuring out who's on our team, and here's to leading every day with a little bit of hope and a little bit of optimism. So with that, I want to turn over to some of the questions that we've gotten. One of the themes that we've seen through some of the questions that are coming in are, I'm going to summarize it, but it's really, my child is up all night and doesn't go to prayers, doesn't go to davening in the morning. So there's a lot of ways to think about this. We're going to kind of just take it back to some questions. There is a lot more context to this than just, here's what you do, here's what you don't do, because it's a thinking question, and it's a question that's going to touch on some of the things that we spoke about. So first, I want you to know that it's super common. That is something that is an ongoing conversation. That is people who are staying up all night and then not able to follow through on the structure, not able to follow through on the things that I want them to do the next morning. So I want to just, in starting to think about how we answer that question, I want to think about or ask the question, why do you want him to go? Why do you want him to go to Minion? Why do you want him to go to Davin? You don't have to answer it. It's a rhetorical question. What are you looking for him in him going to Minion? His mitzvah observance, his discipline, his structure. What's the value underneath this? And then you also might want to find out, what's the halacha? What is the halacha? What's the actual law that needs to happen in this case with my particular child, with my particular family, in this particular situation? How much of what I'm doing is because that's what I'm supposed to do, or that's where we're keeping up with the Goldbergs, which I'm not I don't mean to suggest anyone is, just as in thinking about this, that's one of the things that I often think about it for myself. In what way is this a reflection of what I want or a reflection of what I think is supposed to happen? So I'm going to encourage you to think about what are the values underlying that question. How do I get him to do that? Well, why do you want him to do it? What does he want to do? What's happening? What are the other situations? What else is in the constellation of situations happening in his life that make that a challenge? Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think just one thing that comes up over and over for me in dealing with really difficult situations where, our children or people that we're, trying to support are, not doing the things that are good for them and, that help them thrive, is, it's really hard to go from 0 to 100. And it's really damaging if we allow the search and the journey for perfect or great to get in the way of being good or acceptable. And that's oftentimes what it is when we try to push, well, I want you to come in, I want you to be on time, to get in the way with, well, at least I'm getting up and davening in the morning. And, to let that you're not doing everything as I hope and as I wish, to, are you doing something? At least are you doing something? And, and so again, and that's why I would, highly recommend the importance of having, Rav who can, guide you through exactly that question of, what is the minimum, what is okay, what is, what is not acceptable, and what is something that we can work with, somewhere that we can meet them in the middle and say, fine, I don't want, you're not staying up till 6 o'clock in the morning for this number of reasons, if nothing else, the fact that it's just not good for your health, or because, that's not acceptable, or whatever the reason is. But, at the same time, to realize that, okay, but it doesn't mean that you need to go to bed at 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock that you normally were, beforehand. And, so it's kind of trying to figure out how we can negotiate, how we can find room in the middle, and how we can, find something that is workable and, meets our essential needs, even if it's not that ideal.
And it's not just our essential needs, our children's essential needs. So
Yeah.
it's I'll just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
So someone asked the question, how can they join the Project Extreme team? I just want to clarify that one of the things that I was talking about was if you feel that you need support and help, which we all need support and help, Project Extreme can be a part of your team, whether it's helping to figure out what to do in a particular situation, what your family needs, whether it's engaging with our programs, or we can also guide you to the people who can help if it's not something that we can help with. But if someone wants to know how they can join the Project Extreme team, there are a few different ways. I think that we're going to send out some resources. As I'm thinking about all these resources I want to share with everyone that I don't have time to, so I think we're going to send out some resources. Some of them are the ways that people can become more involved with Project Extreme. So keep an eye on your emails for that. And
there's also a new resource tab on the website.
Oh, there is a new resource tab on the website. Please feel free to check it out. It's really impressive. So again, we'll send. That is not a plug for Project Extreme as much as a plug for our interns who have been working very hard on both putting this webinar together as well as some other wonderful projects. So we'll keep an eye on your email for that. Any last questions, comments, thoughts before we bid farewell? Okay, again, we'll provide contact information, so if there's anything that needs a follow up in a different way, we'll be able to provide that. So I want to thank you all for coming. I hope that this was something that was able to provide value to you. I know that your time, our time is pulled in a lot of different directions. In some ways, we have a tremendous amount of time. In some ways, we have no time at all. So thank you for sharing this time with us, and I hope that you all have a wonderful night. Y'all, is there anything else that you wanted to say before we close?